The fragrance of expensive lilies usually signals romance, but tonight, in the sprawling, cold corridors of the Shun family estate, it smells like a funeral. Tomorrow is my wedding day. Tomorrow, I am supposed to become Mrs. Shun, the wife of Shun Qingjun, the man I have supported, loved, and shielded for 5 long years. But as I stand outside the heavy mahogany doors of his study, the tray of pear soup in my hands feels like a block of ice. The wedding goes on as scheduled. Shun Qingjuan's voice drifts through the crack in the door. It's that same voice I fell in love with, cool, metallic, and precise, like a scalpel. But the bride will be Lin Man. As for Su Mion, once her family's remaining overseas shares are transferred tomorrow morning, send her to the private sanatorium in Switzerland. Tell her it's for recuperation. Make sure she's kept under 24-hour observation. No phone, no internet. A sharp, giggling feminine laugh follows. Lin Man. The first love who vanished 3 years ago only to reappear a week before our wedding. Qingjun, you're so cruel, she coos, the sound of fabric rustling suggesting she's leaning into him. She really thinks you love her. She even spent 6 months hand-stitching that lace on her gown. If I wear it, won't she lose her mind? It's just a piece of cloth. Manner, Shun Qingjun replies, his tone devoid of any emotion for me. You are the one who fits the crown. Su Mion was always just a placeholder, a tool to stabilize the board while I consolidated power. Now that the Su family is a hollow shell, she has served her purpose. I stand there, my knuckles white as I grip the silver tray. My heart doesn't shatter, it turns into a diamond, hard, cold, and transparent. For 5 years, I was the shadow behind the CEO of the Shun Group. I used my connections, my strategic mind, and my family's prestige to pull him out of the gutter. And his gratitude is a life sentence in a gilded cage. I take a deep breath, steadying my hands. I won't storm in, I won't scream. That is what a victim does. A queen negotiates. I deliberately scuff my heel against the floor. The conversation inside stops instantly. I push the door open with a practiced, gentle smile, the mask of the obedient Su Mion they expect. Qingjun, I brought you some soup. You've been working so late, I say, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Lin Man is draped across his desk, her silk slip dress sliding off one shoulder. She doesn't even bother to move. She looks at me with predatory triumph. Shun Qingjun stands up, his tall, lean frame casting a long shadow. His face is a mask of aristocratic indifference. Mion, he says, using the nickname that now makes my skin crawl. You should be resting. Tomorrow is a big day. It is, I agree, setting the tray down. My eyes catch a glimpse of my wedding dress, the one I spent hundreds of hours on, lying crumpled in the corner of the room. A large, jagged tear runs through the bodice. Lin Man holds a pair of fabric shears in her hand, twirling them like a toy. Oh, Mion, I'm so sorry, Lin Man says, her eyes wide with fake horror. I was just looking at the craftsmanship and, oops, my hand slipped. You aren't angry, are you? It's just a dress. I look at the dress, then at the woman who tore it. And finally at the man who allowed it. Anger is such an exhausting emotion. Manner, I say softly, it's fine, everything can be replaced. Shun Qingjun frowns slightly, perhaps sensing a shift in the air he can't quite name. Go back to your room, Su Mion. My mother wants to see you in the garden pavilion. She has something to discuss regarding the ceremony. I know what the discussion is. The Shun matron, a woman who treated me like a servant while I rebuilt her son's fortune, wants to ensure I sign the final gift deed for my father's remaining shares before the I-dos. As I turn to leave, Lin Man steps forward, purposely tripping over her own feet and crashing into me. The hot pear soup splashes onto her arm. She lets out a piercing shriek that could wake the dead. Ah, my arm, she burned me. Qingjun. She did it on purpose. Shun Qingjun is by her side in a second. He grabs my wrist, his grip like a vice. His eyes, usually cold, are now burning with a frightening intensity. Su Mion, I told you to be sensible, he hisses. Manna just got back. She's fragile. Is this how you show your grace? It was an accident, I say, looking him straight in the eye. Apologize, he commands. Kneel down and check if she's hurt. Now, behind him, Lin Man smirks, her burn barely a faint pink mark. She mouths the words, "You're nothing." I look at this man, the man I once thought was my soulmate. I realize now that I didn't love him. I loved the potential of what we could build, but I built a monster instead. I apologize, I say, my voice calm. For everything I've done for this family that went unappreciated, I don't kneel. Instead, I pull my hand back with such force it surprises him. I'll go see your mother now, I say. I walk out of the study. But I don't go to the garden. I head to the servants' entrance where my loyal driver is waiting. As I walk, I reach into my pocket and feel the small, cold device, the digital recorder that captured every word of their plan to institutionalize me and steal my assets. I also check my phone, a message from an encrypted number. The transition is complete. Alpha, your new identity is active. The private jet is fueled at Hangar 4. All Sue family assets have been moved to the Ceres Offshore Trust. You are now the majority creditor of the Shun Group's debt. I smile. They think they are replacing a bride. They don't realize they are losing their owner. But first, I have a little performance for the Shun matron. I find her in the pavilion, clutching a jade bracelet, the Shun family heirloom. Sue Mion, you're late, she snaps, not looking up. The jeweler said this bracelet needs cleaning. And here, she slides a thick stack of papers across the stone table. Sign these. It's the transfer for the North Seaport shares. Consider it your dowry for entering a family as prestigious as ours. I pick up the pen. I see Lin Man and Shen Qingjun approaching from the shadows of the garden, watching to see if I'll comply. Of course, mother, I say. I sign the name Sue Mion for the very last time. But what they don't see is the small print at the bottom, a clause I inserted weeks ago that voids the entire contract if the marriage is not legally consummated within 24 hours of the signing, and I have no intention of being there for the wedding. There, I say, standing up, it's done. Suddenly, Lin Man rushes forward, snatching the jade bracelet from the table. Oh, it's beautiful, auntie. Can I try it on? The matron smiles warmly at her, a smile she never gave me. Of course, dear. It suits you much better anyway. Lin Man puts it on, then looks at me with a wicked glint. She suddenly slams her wrist against the stone edge of the pavilion. The jade shatters into 3 pieces. Oh no, she gasps, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. Sue Mion, why did you push my arm? The matron stands up, her face contorted with rage. You jealous creature. That bracelet has been in our family for 4 generations. Guards, Shen Qingjun steps into the light. His face disgusted. I thought you were better than this. Sue Mion, since you can't behave, you'll spend tonight in the attic, no dinner. Reflect on what it means to be a Shun. I look at the broken jade on the floor. It's the perfect metaphor for our relationship. You're right, Qingjun, I say, my voice light, almost airy. I don't belong here. I let the guards lead me toward the house. They think they are locking me in. They don't know that I've already unlocked the door to their ruin. As the door to the attic clicks shut, I pull a secondary phone from my garter. Old Chen, I whisper to my lawyer, execute phase 2. By the time the sun rises on their wedding, I want the Shun Group's credit line frozen. And, send the anonymous tip to the SEC regarding Shen Qingjuan's creative accounting. I look out the small attic window at the storm clouds gathering over the city. The hunt has begun, and I am the one with the bow. The attic of the Shun estate is a graveyard of broken memories, old furniture covered in white sheets, smelling of dust and neglected history. The guards locked the heavy oak door from the outside, their footsteps receding down the marble hallway with a rhythmic finality. They think I am a trapped bird, weeping into the silk of my ruined dreams. They couldn't be more wrong. I stand by the small, arched window. Outside, the sky has turned a bruised purple, and the first heavy drops of a summer storm are beginning to lash against the glass. I reach into the hollowed-out lining of my heavy velvet coat, the one I insisted on wearing despite the heat, claiming it was a family tradition. From its depths, I pull out a sleek black satellite phone and a high-frequency signal jammer. For 5 years, I played the part of the devoted, soft-spoken fiancé. I allowed Shen Qingjun to believe he had molded me into the perfect corporate accessory. I let him think my family's wealth was his for the taking. But while he was busy whining and dining Lin Man in secret, I was building a digital fortress. I flip a switch on the jammer, a soft blue light pulses. In an instant, the security cameras in this wing of the house loop a pre-recorded feed of me sitting on a moth-eaten sofa, head in my hands, seemingly devastated. Alpha to base, I whisper into the satellite phone. We hear you, boss. Old Chen's voice crackles, steady and reassuring. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands are fully saturated. The 15% stake in Shin Group that you held through the shell company Starlight Holdings has been dumped onto the dark pool markets. The price hasn't moved yet. But the fuse is lit, and the physical assets, I ask, watching a flash of lightning illuminate the sprawling gardens below. I can see the white silk canopies of the wedding altar being lashed by the wind, your father's private collection, the deeds to the North Seaport, and the intellectual property for the new AI chips all moved to the Series Trust. On paper, Soo-mi-on owns nothing, but Series owns everything that matters to the Shins. A cold smile touches my lips. Good. What about the gift for the wedding morning? The forensic accountants have finished the deep dive, old Chen says, and I can hear the grim satisfaction in his tone. Shin Qingjun wasn't just cheating on you, boss. He's been laundering money through Lin Man's charity foundation for 3 years. We have the ledger. It's a masterpiece of fraud. Keep it ready. I want the notification to hit his personal tablet exactly 60 seconds before he steps onto that altar. I hang up and turn my attention to the room. I don't have much time. The storm is my cover. I move to the back of the attic, pushing aside a heavy wardrobe to reveal a small, rusted maintenance hatch that leads to the servants' staircase, a relic of the house's original architecture that the Shins, in their arrogance, forgot existed. As I descend the narrow, creaking stairs, my mind flashes to Shin Qingjuan's face tonight, the way he looked at Lin Man with such protection. As if she were a delicate flower and I was the storm. He doesn't realize that I am not the storm, I am the tectonic shift beneath his feet. I reach the ground floor. The house is buzzing with the frantic energy of wedding preparations. I can hear the head butler bark orders at the florists. I slip into the shadows of the pantry, my heart racing but my hands steady. Suddenly, the door to the pantry swings open. I press myself into the gap between the industrial refrigerator and the wall. I'm telling you, he's going to dump her tomorrow, a voice whispers. It's Sarah, the maid who always went out of her way to be rude to me. Sensing the Shin's disdain, I saw the dress. Miss Lin is already trying on the jewelry. Poor Soo-mi-on is locked upstairs like a madwoman. Serves her right, another voice sneers. She thought she could buy her way into a family like this. Money can't buy class. I wait until their footsteps fade, their laughter echoing in the tiled hallway. Class, I think. I'm about to show you the cost of your class. I exit through the delivery entrance, the rain drenching me instantly. A black SUV with tinted windows is idling by the back gate. The driver, a man named Zhao whom I saved from a debt spiral years ago, steps out and holds the door open. The airport? Not yet. I say, climbing into the back seat and pulling off the soaked velvet coat to reveal a sharp, charcoal grey power suit underneath. We have one stop to make, the South Bank Pier. But the storm, the bridge might close, then we'll get there before it does. As we roar away from the Shin estate, my phone vibrates. It's a text from Shin Qingjun. I hope the cold of the attic has cleared your head. Me on. If you behave tomorrow and sign the supplementary documents without a scene, I might reconsider the sanatorium. I'll give you a small apartment in the suburbs instead. Don't ruin your last chance. I stare at the screen. He actually thinks he's being merciful. He thinks he is the one granting me a life. I type back a single word, understood. At the South Bank Pier, the wind is howling, whipping the sea into a frenzy of white foam. I step out of the car, the rain stinging my face. Standing there, waiting under a black umbrella, is a tall figure in a long trench coat. Zhu Xinian. He is Shin Qingjuan's greatest rival, a man known as the Ice King of the financial world. He's also the only person who knows exactly who I am, because I'm the one who secretly funded his last 3 hostile takeovers. You're late, Soo-mi-on, he says, his voice deep and resonant over the roar of the ocean. I had to wait for the guards to finish their rounds, I reply, walking toward him. He looks at me. His eyes sharp and analytical. You're really doing it. You're leaving him with nothing but a scandal and a mountain of debt. He wanted a replacement bride, I say, looking out at the dark horizon. I'm just giving him the vacuum he deserves. Zhu Xinian reaches into his coat and pulls out a thick envelope. Here is the final piece of the puzzle. The evidence that Shin's father didn't just acquire your father's company, he sabotaged the safety protocols at the factory. Your father's death wasn't an accident, Soo-mi-on, it was a calculated liquidation. The world seems to go silent for a heartbeat. I knew they were thieves, I knew they were liars, but I didn't know they were murderers. My grip on the envelope tightens until my knuckles ache. A cold, Crystalline rage replaces the last flickering embers of my past. This isn't just about a broken heart or stolen shares anymore. This is blood for blood. Thank you, Shinian, I say quietly. What will you do now? I'm going to the airport. I have a 3:00 a.m. flight to Singapore. From there, I disappear. For 3 years, the world will forget Su Mion ever existed. And then, I look up at him, the lightning reflecting in my eyes. And then, I'll come back as the person who buys his soul. I turn back to the SUV. Before I get in, I take the heavy diamond engagement ring, the 5-carat stone Shen Qingjun bragged about but never actually paid for. I found the unpaid invoice in his desk, and I toss it into the churning black water of the harbor. Goodbye, Mion Mion, I whisper to the girl I used to be. She's dead now. The drive to the airport is a blur of neon lights and rain-slicked asphalt. At Hangar 4, my private jet is idling, its engines a low, powerful hum, as I climb the stairs. I see the lights of the city behind me. Somewhere in that glittering maze, Shen Qingjun is probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of the power he'll consolidate tomorrow. I settle into the leather seat. The flight attendant brings me a glass of vintage champagne. Everything all right, MS, Alpha, she asks. Perfect, I say. Taking a sip, I pull out my original phone, the one the Shens know. I open the voice recorder and set a delayed broadcast to the Shen estate's internal intercom system, timed for 10:00 a.m. tomorrow, the exact moment the ceremony starts. Dear Qingjun, I record, my voice sweet and melodic. I realized I forgot to tell you something before I left. You always said I was a placeholder. Well, look at your bank accounts. It turns out, you were the one just holding my seat. Enjoy the wedding. Lin Man looks lovely in my ripped dress. I hit schedule. The jet begins to taxi. As we lift off, the pressure in the cabin rises, and I feel a strange, exhilarating lightness below me. The Shen estate is just a tiny, fading dot of light in a sea of darkness. The stage is set. The actors are in place. Tomorrow, the curtains will rise on the greatest tragedy of Shen Qingjuan's life, and I will be watching from a throne they haven't even seen yet. The morning of the wedding dawned with a deceptive, porcelain blue sky, as if the violent storm of the previous night had never happened. The 7-star Grand Millennium Hotel was a hive of activity. Thousands of white hydrangeas had been flown in from Holland, their scent cloying and thick in the ballroom. Outside, the red carpet stretched like a long, bleeding tongue, welcoming the elite of Haicheng ministers, tech moguls, and socialites all eager to witness the union of the Shen Empire and the remnants of the Su legacy. Back at the Shen estate, the silence in the attic was absolute. It wasn't until 8:00 a.m. that the head butler, accompanied by 2 hulking security guards, unlocked the door to escort me to the hotel for my final transformation. When they pushed the door open, the room was empty, the bed was neatly made, the ruined wedding dress was gone. In its place on the velvet sofa sat a single, white lily and a note written in elegant, rhythmic calligraphy. A bride should never be late to her own funeral. Panic didn't set in immediately. Shen Qingjun, receiving the news while having his cufflinks fastened by a valet, simply narrowed his eyes. She's playing games, he remarked to his reflection, his voice a cool blade. She has nowhere to go, her accounts are flagged, her father's house is under my name, and she hasn't a friend left in this city. Find her, check the transit hubs. She's likely hiding in a hotel nearby, waiting for me to beg her to come back. He didn't realize that I wasn't hiding. I was already gone, 30,000 feet above the ocean. By 10:00 a.m., the hotel ballroom was packed. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet playing Vivaldi. Shen Qingjun stood at the altar, looking every bit the ice prince of the business world in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. Beside him, hidden behind a silkscreen, Lin Man was vibrating with predatory excitement. She was draped in a different gown, a plunging, champagne gold piece that screamed of mistress turned queen. Is she found? Shen Qingjun whispered to his assistant, who rushed to the altar. No, sir, but there's a problem. The bank just called, the $200 million bridge loan for the North Sea project. It's been rescinded. They say the collateral, the Su family shares, has been flagged as disputed assets by an international trust. Shen Qingjuan's jaw tightened. Ignore it for now, we announce the marriage first. Once Lin Man is legally my wife and we announce the merger, the market confidence will force the bank's hand. Start the music. The heavy gilded doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The guests turned, cameras flashing, expecting to see the shy, subdued Soo Mi-on. The aisle remained empty. The string quartet faltered. A murmur broke out among the crowd. Shin Qingjuan's mother, the matron, stood up, her face pale. "Where is she?" she hissed. Suddenly, the massive 50-foot LED screen behind the altar, the one intended to show a montage of our fairytale romance, flickered to life. But it wasn't a video of us. It was a black screen with white text scrolling at lightning speed. Audit report, Shun Group, the Manor Foundation. The music stopped abruptly. In its place, a high-definition audio recording began to play over the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system. As for Soo Mi-on, send her to the private sanatorium. Make sure she's kept under 24-hour observation. No phone, no internet. The guests gasped. Shin Qingjuan's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He lunged for the control panel at the side of the stage, but the system had been hard-coded with a recursive virus. It was untouchable. Then came Lin Man's voice, crystal clear and mocking. "If I wear it, won't she lose her mind?" And finally, my own voice, recorded just hours ago, calm and chilling. "Dear Qingjun, you always said I was a placeholder. Well, look at your bank accounts. It turns out, you were the one just holding my seat. Enjoy the wedding. Lin Man looks lovely in my ripped dress." The screen shifted. It showed a real-time graph of the Shun Group stock. It was a vertical drop, a flash crash. Millions of dollars of market cap were evaporating every second. "Shut it off. Turn it off," the matron screamed, clutching her chest. A group of men in dark suits pushed through the crowd. They weren't wedding guests. They were federal investigators from the Financial Crimes Division. "Shin Qingjun," the lead officer asked, stepping onto the altar. "We have a warrant to seize all digital devices and records related to the Shun Group and the Manor Foundation. We've received a comprehensive whistleblower file regarding money laundering and the illegal seizure of Soo family assets." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Socialites were standing on chairs to get a better view. Reporters were live-streaming the downfall of the decade. Lin Man stepped out from behind the screen, her face twisted in a mask of terror. "Qingjun, do something," she wailed, grabbing his arm. Shin Qingjun looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he looked genuinely afraid, not of the law, but of the realization that he had been outplayed by the woman he considered a tool. He looked at his phone, which was now exploding with notifications. "Urgent. All personal accounts frozen. Urgent. Ceres Trust has filed a hostile takeover bid for Shun Group." "Who is Ceres?" he whispered to himself, his voice trembling, at that exact moment. On a private island in the Maldives, I sat on a terrace overlooking the turquoise water. My laptop was open, showing the live feed of the ballroom chaos from a hidden camera I'd planted in the floral arrangements. I watched as the police led Shin Qingjun out of the hotel through a side exit to avoid the mob of photographers. I watched as Lin Man was pushed aside by the very socialites who had been flattering her an hour ago. I picked up a glass of chilled white wine and raised it toward the screen. "To the groom," I said softly to the empty air. I closed the laptop and pulled out a new passport. The name inside wasn't Soo Mi-on, it was Siren. The first phase was over. I had stripped them of their dignity and their immediate liquidity. But I knew the Shins. They were like cockroaches. They would find a way to survive the initial blast. They would scramble, they would borrow. And they would fight to keep their grip on the city. Good. I didn't want them to go down in a single day. That would be too merciful. I wanted them to spend the next few years struggling, hoping, and gasping for air only for me to return and personally pull the plug. "Old Chen," I said into my headset as I watched the sun dip below the horizon. "Start the recruitment process for the Haicheng office. I want the best, the hungriest, and the most ruthless. In 3 years, we go back, understood? Boss, and the Shun family, let them keep the house for now." I smiled. It's easier to burn a building when the inhabitants are still inside. Feeling safe, I leaned back, the tropical breeze ruffling my hair. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like a Soo, or a Shun, or a victim. I felt like the architect of a new world. 3 years is a long time for a ghost to stay dead, but it's the perfect amount of time for a hunter to sharpen her blade. The Haicheng I returned to was not the one I left. The city skyline had grown sharper, more aggressive, much like my own reflection in the darkened glass of the Maybach. I sat in the back seat, wearing a structured, ivory power suit that commanded the air around it. My face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, the classic armor of the elite. The Shun Group is down to its last lifeline. Ms. Siren, my secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Nina, whispered as we pulled up to the entrance of the International Finance Forum. Their credit rating has been downgraded to junk status. The only thing keeping them afloat is the rumor that the Ceres Group might consider an acquisition. They're desperate. Despair is a powerful motivator, I replied, my voice now deeper, laced with a cold authority I hadn't possessed 3 years ago. Let's see how much they're willing to crawl. The forum was the most prestigious event of the year. The grand ballroom of the Victoria Harbour Hotel was filled with the scent of bergamot and the quiet clinking of crystal. As I entered, a hush followed in my wake. I wasn't Sue Meon anymore. I was the mysterious S, the CEO of Ceres, a woman whose name was whispered in boardroom deals from London to New York, but whose face remained a phantom. And there he was. Shen Qingjun stood near the bar, looking older, the ice in his demeanor now replaced by a frantic, hollowed-out exhaustion. His bespoke suit looked slightly loose, as if he had lost weight from the stress of 1,000 lawsuits. Beside him stood Lin Man. She was no longer the triumphant mistress. She looked like a withered flower, her jewelry far too flashy for an afternoon forum, her eyes darting around the room, looking for anyone, to validate her existence. Qingjun, there she is, Lin Man hissed, clutching his arm. That's the woman from Ceres. If you can get her to sign the memorandum today, the banks will stop the foreclosure on the mansion. Shen Qingjun straightened his tie, a glimmer of his old arrogance returning. He still believed in the power of his charm. He still thought the world revolved around his needs. I walked toward the VIP lounge, my heels clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. As I passed them, Shen Qingjun stepped forward, blocking my path with a practiced, charming smile. Ms. Siren, I'm Shen Qingjun, CEO of the Shun Group. I believe we have an appointment to discuss the restructuring of our debt. I stopped. I didn't look at him directly. I looked at the glass of sparkling water in my hand. The Shun Group, I said, my voice smooth and indifferent. My analysts told me that company was already in probate. I don't make a habit of talking to the dead. Shen Qingjuan's smile faltered. We've had some setbacks, but our core assets are still unparalleled. We just need a strategic partner who understands the long-term vision. Lin Man chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate. We've heard so much about your vision. Ms. Siren, it's an honor. I'm Lin Man, the future lady of the Shun House. I finally turned my head, letting my sunglasses slide down my nose just enough for them to see my eyes. Not enough to recognize me as the dead Sue Meon. 3 years of subtle aesthetic refinement and a completely different aura saw to that. My gaze was like a polar wind. Future lady, I chuckled, a dry, melodic sound. I thought the Shun House was currently being appraised for a forced auction. It's hard to be a lady of a house that belongs to the bank. Lin Man's face flushed a deep, ugly red. How dare you? Do you know who we are? I know exactly who you are, I said, stepping closer to her. My presence so suffocating she actually took a step back. You're the woman who thinks a stolen wedding dress makes a bride, and you, I turned to Shen Qingjun, are the man who thinks a stolen legacy makes a king. You're both mistaken. Shen Qingjun frowned, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Have we met before? Your voice, it sounds familiar. A lot of people think they know me, I said, pulling my glasses back up. Usually, it's just before I take everything they own. I signaled to my security detail, Nina. The air in here is getting heavy with the smell of failure. Move my meetings to the yacht. I won't stay in a room where the guests can't even pay their own bar tabs. As I turned to leave, a tall, imposing figure stepped out from the crowd. Zhu Xinian. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. He was the only one who knew the truth. Ms. Siren, a word, he asked, offering his arm. I took it, of course, Mr. Zhu. We walked past the stunned Shins, leaving them in the middle of the ballroom as the whispers of the other guests rose like a tide. You're enjoying this too much, Zhu Xinian murmured as we reached the elevators. I haven't even started, I replied. This was just the introduction. I want them to feel the hope first. I want them to think they can win me over. Because the higher they climb on that hope, the more bones they'll break when I finally let go. And the next step, the charity auction tonight, I said, my eyes cold. I heard Shen Qingjun is planning to auction off his family's private collection to prove he's still solvent. I'm going to make sure he leaves that auction with nothing but the clothes on his back. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from the private investigator I'd hired to track the Shun estate. Subject Lin Man just entered a high-end pawn shop. She's trying to sell a jade bracelet. Looks like it's been repaired. I smiled. The broken bracelet from the night I left. She had glued it back together, just like she had tried to glue her life together. Nina, I said into my earpiece, buy that bracelet from the pawn shop. I want to give it back to her tonight. In front of everyone, I stepped out of the hotel and into the bright, harsh sunlight of the harbor. The hunt was no longer in the shadows. We were in the open now, and I was the one holding the leash. The top-floor ballroom of the Haicheng Arts Center swayed with the shadows of crystal chandeliers. Reflecting the most hypocritical gala in the city, tonight was the Spring Radiance charity auction, ostensibly to raise funds for underprivileged children, but everyone knew it was Shen Qingjuan's final attempt to save face. He needed this event to prove that the Shun family still possessed deep roots. Hoping to trick banks and investors into one last leap of faith, the moment I stepped into the hall, the boisterous laughter dropped several decibels. Tonight, I wore a deep purple mermaid gown. The hemline encrusted with tiny black diamonds that flowed like a river of midnight as I walked. "Ms. Siren is here," whispered the crowd. I kept my eyes forward, walking toward the center seat in the front row. Not far from me, in the secondary VIP section, sat Shen Qingjun. His face was a sickly, ashen gray under the lights, and his right hand was unconsciously fiddling with his cufflink, a micro-habit he had whenever he was under extreme anxiety. Lin Man sat beside him, desperately trying to hide her haggard eyes with heavy foundation. She was wearing an out-of-season haute couture piece and a string of mediocre pearls. Clearly, the Shun family's financial rot had already reached her jewelry box. "Qingjun, once that snow goddess porcelain piece is auctioned off, it'll cover a huge chunk of our liquidity gap," Lin Man whispered, her eyes darting greedily toward the flawless imperial green jade bangle on my wrist. The auction began. I didn't even lift my head for the first few items, until the usher brought out a brocade box. Next, a pair of Qing Dynasty Hertian jade bangles from Mr. Shen's private collection, smooth, flawless, and signifying perfection. The auctioneer announced grandly. I recognized them. They were Shen family heirlooms. Shen's mother had once told me they were for the daughter-in-law. Now, Shen Qingjun had sunk low enough to sell his ancestral legacy. 500,000, someone bid. 600,000, Shen Qingjuan's expression softened slightly. Just as he thought the sale would go through smoothly, I raised my paddle. 5 million. My voice was as flat as if I were buying a piece of candy. The room went dead silent. Shen Qingjun snapped his head around, looking at me in disbelief. 5 million was 10 times the market value. 5 million once, 5 million twice, 6 million. Shen Qingjun suddenly raised his paddle. He couldn't let these bangles fall into the hands of an outsider, especially not the hostile siren. If he lost his family's pride tonight, the Shuns would be finished socially. I arched an eyebrow, not even blinking. 10 million. Shen Qingjuan's hand shook. Lin Man grabbed his arm in a panic. "Qingjun, are you crazy? We're here to get cash, not spend it." 10 million. Sold. I stood up, walked gracefully onto the stage, and accepted the box, in front of everyone. I handed it directly to a janitor waiting in the wings. "The color of this jade is too muddled. It's not fit for my collection. Donate it to the charity foundation. Sell it for whatever you can get and buy some textbooks for the children." Shen Qingjuan's face turned from green to purple, then to a near-translucent white. This was raw, unadulterated humiliation. The ancestral treasure he treated as a lifeline was trash in my eyes. "Ms. Siren, you're taking this too far." Lin Man finally couldn't help herself. She jumped up, pointing a finger at me, her voice shrill. "You're just hiding behind your money. Why are you targeting the Shen family?" I turned around, looking down at her from the stage. My secretary, Nina, walked up carrying another box. "Targeting you, Ms. Lin, no. I simply like returning things to their rightful owners." I opened the box for all to see. Inside was the white jade bracelet, the one that had been shattered and sloppily glued back together with cheap adhesive. "You broke this 3 years ago, didn't you?" I smiled thinly at her. "I found it in a dusty, run-down pawn shop. Ms. Lin, has the Shun family become so destitute that you're pawning off damaged goods for pocket change?" The room erupted into suppressed snickers. Socialites hid their faces behind fans, their eyes full of disdain. Lin Man stood frozen, as if struck by lightning. You, how could you? She looked at Shen Qingjun for help. Shen Qingjun stared at me, that haunting sense of familiarity crashing over him again like a tidal wave. He stood up, striding to the front of the stage, and hissed, "Who are you? Su Mion has been dead for 3 years. Why do you have that bracelet? Mr. Shen, the dead don't always stay gone, and the living aren't always innocent." I leaned in close to his ear, my breath like silk but my voice cold as a crypt. "Tell me, if the late Mr. Shen knew you bankrupted the family foundation for this woman, would he crawl out of his grave in rage?" Shen Qingjuan's pupils contracted sharply. Just then, the auction's grand finale began. It was the development rights for a massive plot of land, the Haicheng North Port. Ladies and gentlemen, the starting bid for the North Port plot, 1 billion. This was Shen Qingjuan's last chance to pivot. If he secured this land, the banks would grant him an extension on his loans. He raised his paddle immediately, attempting to project an image of power. But I didn't bid, I just sat there, watching him with amusement. 1 billion 50 million. 1.1 billion. Finally, Shen Qingjun won the bid at a staggering 1.2 billion. He let out a breath of relief, looking back at me with a glimmer of survivor's defiance. But what he didn't know was that while he was bidding, my team had already bought out all the surrounding infrastructure and access rights for the North Port plot. Without my permission, he couldn't even run a water pipe into that land. Congratulations, Mr. Shen, you just bought a perfect wasteland. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. What do you mean? The smile froze on his face. I mean that from now on. You don't just owe me money, you owe me the millions in interest this land will bleed every day. I smiled at Zhu Xinian, who was waiting by the exit. Shall we, Mr. Zhu? The air in here is becoming rather stagnant. I walked out of the hall, the sounds of Lin Man's screams and Shen Qingjuan's muffled roars echoing behind me. Before getting into the car, I glanced back at the glowing building. This was just the beginning. I wanted to see them at the peak of their hope. Only so they could finally see the abyss beneath their feet. The rain in Haicheng always carries a faint scent of rusted iron. I sat in the office of the abandoned Su Group factory, a place that had long been forgotten, where the wallpaper peeled away like dead skin to reveal the dark red brick beneath. I had reclaimed this land just 3 days ago at a court-ordered auction. Shen Qingjun is almost here, Nina said, standing behind me as she draped a black cashmere coat over my shoulders. And the witness? I asked, looking out the cracked window. Old Zhong is waiting in the inner room. He has the backup from the dashboard camera recorded before their accident. It's partially corrupted, but there's enough to tell the story. The sound of screeching tires broke the silence outside. A few minutes later, Shen Qingjun pushed open the trembling iron door. He hadn't brought Lin Man. He likely no longer had the energy to deal with her hysterics. He scanned the dilapidated office, a look of profound unease flickering in his eyes. "You asked me here, what do you want?" Shen Qingjuan's voice was hoarse. The cool, aristocratic air of a prince of industry had been thoroughly shattered by the web of red veins in his exhausted eyes. I swiveled my chair around, playing with an old Parker fountain pen, the one my father used to love. "Doesn't this place look familiar, Mr. Shen?" I chuckled softly, pointing toward the towering cooling stack outside. 3 years ago, on a night just like this, my father fell to his accidental death on the conveyor belt beneath that tower. You were the first one on the scene, weren't you? Shen Qingjuan's face went deathly pale. His fingertips began to tremble. "Su Mion, it is you. You came back for revenge. You sabotaged the North Port project and buried the Shens in debt. All for these old stories, old stories." I slammed the pen onto the desk, the sharp crack echoing in the hollow room as I stood up. "Shen Qingjun, that was a human life. My father treated you like his own son. He was going to hand you the remaining control of the Su Group on our wedding day. But you couldn't wait, could you?" "I didn't kill him," Shen Qingjun roared, stepping forward to grab my shoulders, only to be blocked by the hulking shadows of my security detail. "No, you didn't pull the trigger yourself," I said, staring him down with ice in my veins, "but you bribed the site safety officer. You ensured the emergency brakes on the induction sensors were turned off during that storm. Not only that, you exploited my father's trust to trick him into signing a debt guarantee that made it legal for you to swallow the Su estate the moment he was gone. Where is your proof?" Shen Qingjun panted, a desperate cornered animal look in his eyes. In business, there are winners and losers, Su Mion. Without evidence, this is nothing but slander. You want evidence. I tilted my head slightly. The door to the inner room creaked open. An old man with white hair and a slight limp walked out. It was old Zhong, the driver who had served my father for 20 years. Young Master Shen, it's been a long time. Old Zhong's voice shook as he clutched a USB drive. You probably thought I was gone. On that night 3 years ago, I was late because of a stomach bug. I arrived just in time to see your people tampering with the sensors from the shadows. I was too scared to speak up then, so I recorded the audio and went into hiding. The moment Shen Qingjun saw old Zhong, his last line of psychological defense crumbled. He stumbled back, hitting a rusted filing cabinet and stirring up a cloud of dust. How are you still alive? He's alive because I've been protecting him, I said, stepping toward Shen Qingjun. I pulled a thick stack of documents from my bag and slapped them against his chest, letting them scatter like autumn leaves. These are the records of every cent you've laundered through offshore accounts over the last 3 years, along with the fraudulent ledgers you created for the North Port Shell Company. Mr. Shen, you don't need to wait for a civil court. This is enough to keep you behind bars for the rest of your life. Shen Qingjun collapsed to his knees, frantically trying to grab the papers, only to realize every page bore the crimson seal of the series group. Why come back? He looked up at me. A single tear of genuine regret finally spilling over. If it's about Lin Man, I'll leave her. I'll give it all back, everything. Just withdraw the evidence. Give it back. I laughed, a sound so cold it felt like a winter frost. Do you think I care about your crumbling assets now? I came back to watch you fall from the pedestal you were so proud of, to watch you drown in the very pit you dug for my family. Suddenly, Shen Qingjuan's phone began to vibrate violently on the floor. He answered it with trembling hands. Lin Man's voice shrieked through the speaker, distorted by terror. Qingjun, the police, they're at the house. They're saying you're under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. They're seizing the mansion. Come home, please. I looked down at him, watching him shrink into a shell of a man. 3 years ago, I begged you not to go through with that replacement bride. I begged you to leave me even a shred of dignity. Did you ever think this day would come? Shen Qingjun sat paralyzed on the dirty floor, his phone sliding from his grip as Lin Man's screams continued to echo in the empty factory. Su Mion, I really did love you, he whispered. Your love was always a liability, I replied, turning my back on him. I looked at Nina. Get old Zhong to the station under full protection. Submit the files. I want the headline of the Shen Group's bankruptcy on every screen by morning. I walked out of the factory. The sun finally broke through the clouds, and though the air was still chilly, it felt clean for the first time in years. The net had finally closed, for Shen Qingjun. This was just the beginning of a life without freedom, a life where every second would be measured in the weight of his own regret. The Shen family mansion, once the bastion of Haicheng's old money arrogance, was now a hollow shell being picked clean by the vultures of the law. Bright red seizure seals were plastered across the grand mahogany doors, and the air was thick with the scent of cheap tobacco from the auction liquidators. I arrived in a sleek, obsidian black limousine. Stepping out, my heels clicked sharply on the driveway where, 3 years ago, I had been forced to leave in a rain-drenched taxi. Today, I owned the asphalt I walked on. Inside, the grand dining room was a scene of pathetic ruin. The crystal chandelier, the one that had once lit up my engagement party, was shrouded in dust. Sitting at the long marble table were the remains of the Shen dynasty, the matron, her face looking like crumpled parchment, and a drunk, disheveled Shen Qingjun. You're late for dinner, Su Mion, Shen Qingjun slurred, raising a bottle of expensive scotch that he had likely hidden from the liquidators. He didn't even look up as I approached. I'm not here for dinner, Qingjun, I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. I'm here to collect the keys. The Series Group bought this property at the debt auction an hour ago. You have 30 minutes to vacate. The matron let out a choked sob. She stood up, her knees wobbling, and did something I never thought I'd see. She knelt. The woman who had treated me like a decorative servant for 5 years was now clutching the hem of my coat. Mion, please, we have nowhere to go. Qingjun is sick, he's not in his right mind. Leave us one wing of the house, just the servants' quarters. I'll do anything. I looked down at her, my expression unreadable. You once told me that class was something you were born with, and that I was lucky just to breathe the same air as your son. It turns out, air is free. But this house costs $60 million. Money you no longer have. I gently pulled my coat from her withered grip. There was no joy in this moment. Only a profound sense of equilibrium. Suddenly, the side door burst open. Lin Man stumbled in, her hair a bird's nest, clutching a designer handbag that looked suspiciously heavy. She was stopped at the door by two of my security guards. "Let me in, I need to get my furs. My jewelry is in the wall safe," she screamed, her face contorted with a frantic, ugly greed. "The safe has already been drilled, Ms. Lin," I said, turning to face her. "And since the jewelry was purchased with funds embezzled from the Manor Foundation, it's currently being catalogued as evidence for the prosecution." Lin Man's eyes darted to Shen Qingjun, looking for a savior, but he just took another long swig of scotch, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. "Qingjun, say something," she wailed. "Tell this ghost to leave us alone." Shen Qingjun finally looked at her, and the contempt in his eyes was so sharp it almost made her flinch. "You," he whispered, "every time I look at you, I remember the day I lost her. I didn't lose Su Mion because of a business deal. I lost her because I thought you were worth the trade. You're nothing but a cheap imitation." Lin Man's face turned a mottled purple. "Me, you're the one who failed, you're the one going to jail. I was the only one who stayed. You stayed for the bank account," I interrupted, stepping between them. "And now that it's empty, you're just two strangers who deserve each other." I signaled to the bailiffs waiting in the hall, "Clear the room, take everything that isn't bolted down. If they refuse to leave, call the precinct. I believe Detective Harris is already waiting for Mr. Shen's statement regarding the Northport fraud." As the movers began hauling away the chairs, I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a single, dusty crystal glass. I poured a splash of the wine I had brought with me, a vintage from the year my father founded his company. I walked to the head of the table, the seat once occupied by the Shen patriarch. I sat down and looked at the three of them. "This is the last supper you didn't invite me to," I said, raising the glass. 3 years ago, you sat in this room and plotted how to discard me like trash. You laughed about sending me to a sanatorium. You discussed how to erase my father's name from history. The room went silent, save for the sound of a heavy wardrobe being dragged across the floor upstairs. "Now," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, "your names are the ones being erased. By tomorrow, the Shen Group will be rebranded as a subsidiary of Ceres. The Shen name will only appear in the crime section of the morning paper." Shen Qingjun stood up, swaying dangerously. He stumbled toward me, his hand reaching out as if to touch my face. "Su Mion, just tell me one thing. Did you ever truly love me, or was I just your first project?" I looked into his hollowed eyes, the eyes of the man I had once stayed up all night worrying about. "I loved the man I thought you could become," I said, "but that man never existed. You were just a shadow I mistook for a mountain." I stood up, leaving the glass half full on the table. "Time's up, leave the keys with the guard at the gate." I walked out of the mansion without looking back. Behind me, I heard the matron's high-pitched wails and the sound of Lin Man and Shen Qingjun descending into a vicious, screaming match over who was to blame for their downfall. As I sat in the back of my car, the gates of the Shen estate closed behind me for the final time. "Where to, Ms. Siren?" the driver asked. "To the police station," I said, watching the mansion shrink in the rearview mirror. "It's time to make sure Lin Man doesn't try to skip town with whatever she has hidden in that handbag." The revenge was almost complete, but the justice, the slow, methodical grinding of the legal system, was just beginning. The air in the interrogation observation room was sterile, smelling of ozone and cold coffee. I stood behind the one-way glass, my silhouette reflected in the dark surface, looking like a phantom haunting the living. On the other side of the glass, Lin Man sat bolted to a metal chair. She was no longer the shimmering first love in champagne silk. She was a woman whose mask had melted, revealing the frantic, ugly desperation beneath. "I didn't do anything, it was all Qingjun," she shrieked, slamming her palms against the table. Her designer handbag, the one I had flagged, lay open between two detectives. Inside, they hadn't just found jewelry. They had found 3 different passports and a thick ledger of consulting fees paid from the Shen Group to a shell company in her brother's name. "Ms. Lin," Detective Harris said, his voice a calm, rhythmic drone, "we have the wire transfer records. We also have a statement from the pawn shop owner where you tried to sell a certain jade bracelet. He's quite talkative when facing a fencing charge. That was a gift, a family heirloom. It was a piece of evidence, I whispered to the glass, though she couldn't hear me. I watched as the door to the interrogation room opened. A young officer walked in and whispered something to Harris. The detective looked up at the glass at me and nodded. Then he turned back to Lin Man with a cold, thin smile. Your fiancé just signed his confession, Ms. Lin, but he added a very interesting footnote. He claims you were the one who suggested the institutionalization of Su Mion. He says you provided the contact for the private sanatorium, a facility that, as it turns out, has been under investigation for human trafficking and illegal detention. Lin Man's face went from pale to a ghastly, bruised violet. He said what? That liar. He wanted her gone. He hated her. Actually, Harris leaned in. He said he did it for you. And since you were the one who facilitated the illegal contract, you're looking at a kidnapping charge on top of the financial fraud. I felt a cold shiver of satisfaction. I hadn't just returned to take their money. I had returned to let them tear each other apart. The eternal love they had flaunted in my face 3 years ago was nothing more than a pact between two scavengers. Now that there was no more meat on the bone, they were eating each other. I walked out of the observation room and into the bustling hallway of the precinct. There, being led in handcuffs toward the processing desk, was Shen Qingjun. He looked like a ghost. His eyes were sunken, his skin sallow. When he saw me, he stopped. The officers tried to nudge him forward, but he remained rooted to the spot, staring at me with a mixture of horror and a strange, twisted longing. Mion, he rasped. It's Ms. Siren, I corrected him, my voice projecting a calm that felt like a physical weight. You won, he said, a hollow laugh rattling in his chest. You burned it all. Are you happy now, standing there in your expensive shoes while I go to a cage? Happiness has nothing to do with it. Qingjun, I said, stepping closer until I could see the reflection of my own success in his defeated eyes. This is simply the audit of your life. You spent years stealing time, dignity, and lives from others. Now, the bill has come due. I'm just the one who made sure you couldn't declare bankruptcy on your sins. I would have given you the world if you had just stayed, he whispered, his voice cracking. You never had the world to give, I replied. You only had a stolen empire and a heart made of glass. And glass, as you should know by now, is very easy to shatter. I turned away as the officers pulled him toward the booking area. I didn't look back when I heard him call my name one last time, a pathetic, mourning sound that was swallowed by the noise of the station. Outside, the night air was crisp. Zhu Xinian was leaning against my limousine, checking his watch. He looked up as I approached, a faint, respectful smile on his face. It's done, he asked. The depositions are signed, the evidence is filed, they'll be in trial for years, and they'll be in prison for decades, I said. Exhaling a long breath I felt I'd been holding since the night of the wedding, and the series group, we move into the old Shen headquarters tomorrow morning. I want the sign changed by noon. I want everyone in this city to see a new name on that skyline. Zhu Xinian opened the car door for me. You've become quite the hunter. Su Mion, or should I call you Siren? I paused, looking at the city lights reflecting in the dark waters of the harbor. Su Mion died in that attic. Siren was the one who fought for her. But now, I think I just want to be myself, a woman who doesn't need a name to be powerful. As the car pulled away, I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't a victim, wasn't a bride, and wasn't a ghost. She was the architect of her own destiny. And for the first time in my life, the silence of the night didn't feel lonely, it felt like freedom. The corridors of the Haicheng People's Court were lined with marble that felt as cold as a tombstone. This was the final stage, the arena where the myths of the elite were dismantled by the cold, impartial hand of the law. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the nervous sweat of the Shen family's last few remaining associates. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a charcoal grey suit tailored with military precision. Beside me, Zhu Xinian sat in silence. His presence a stabilizing force. Across the aisle, the Shen matron sat alone. She had tried to wear her finest furs to court, but the bailiffs had informed her that all her luxury assets were currently under a temporary restraining order. She looked shrunken. A bitter old woman clutching a plastic water bottle as if it were a scepter. All rise, the bailiff intoned. Judge Sterling, a man known for a temperament like forged steel, took the bench. Below him, in the defendant's dock, sat Shen Qingjun. He was clean-shaven now, but his skin had a translucent, sickly quality. He looked like a man who had already been erased from the world he once ruled. The prosecution calls its primary witness, the state attorney announced, Ms. Siren, formerly known as Su Mion. A ripple of whispers broke out in the courtroom. I stood up, the sound of my heels on the wood floor echoing like a gavel. As I walked to the stand, I felt Shen Qingjuan's gaze on me, a heavy, pleading weight. I didn't look back. I took the oath, my voice clear and unwavering. For the next 3 hours, I laid out the anatomy of a betrayal. I presented the offshore trail, the manipulated safety reports from the factory, and the recording from the night of the wedding. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of the Shen dynasty. Ms. Siren, the defense attorney began, rising for cross-examination. He was a man paid a king's ransom to find a crack in my armor. Isn't it true that this entire legal campaign is born out of a woman scorned? Is this not simply a case of an emotional vendetta against a man who chose another woman over you? I looked at him, my expression one of mild boredom. If I wanted to punish him for choosing another woman, I would have burned his clothes. I am here because he stole a life, my father's life, and built a financial empire on the ruins of my family's legacy. This isn't about a broken heart, counselor. It's about a broken system that allowed a man like him to think he was above the law. The defense attorney faltered. He looked at his client, but Shen Qingjun was staring at his own hands. Then came the moment that turned the trial into a tragedy. The prosecution called a surprise witness, Lin Man. She was led in from a separate holding cell, wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. She looked at Shen Qingjun, and for a moment, the old flame of their first love flickered in her eyes. But then she looked at me, then at the heavy files of evidence against her, and her survival instinct won out. He told me to do it. She sobbed into the microphone, her voice a shrill, desperate plea. Qingjun said Su Mion was a dead weight. He told me the factory accident was a necessary sacrifice for our future. I didn't want the money. He forced me to sign those shell company documents. You lying bitch. The matron screamed from the gallery, standing up and shaking her fist. You were the one who pushed for it. You wanted the mansion. You wanted the jewels. Silence in the court. Judge Sterling hammered his gavel, his face darkening. Shen Qingjun looked up then. He looked at Lin Man, the woman he had destroyed my life for, as she sold his soul to save her own skin. He let out a dry, broken laugh that chilled everyone in the room. It's true, Shen Qingjun said. His voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. He ignored his lawyer's frantic gestures to remain silent. I did it all. I took the Su family. I let the censors fail, and I planned to lock Su Mion away. But I didn't do it for Lin Man. I did it because I was afraid of the woman Su Mion was becoming. I knew that if I didn't break her, she would eventually be better than me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the most honest thing he had ever said. And it was his final confession of cowardice. I looked at him, and for the first time, the anger left me. All that was left was a profound sense of pity for a man who was so small he had to destroy a world just to feel tall. The court will recess for sentencing, Judge Sterling announced. As they led Shen Qingjun out in handcuffs, he stopped for a split second beside the witness stand. I hope you found what you were looking for, he whispered. I found myself, I replied. You just found your reflection. 3 days later, the sentence was read, 15 years for Shen Qingjun, 8 for Lin Man. The Shen group was ordered to pay full restitution to the Su estate, effectively liquidating every remaining cent the family possessed. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sun was blindingly bright. A mob of reporters swarmed me, cameras flashing, microphones thrust into my face. Ms. Siren, how does it feel to have justice? What's next for the series group? I stopped at the top of the stairs, looking out over the city. I didn't feel like a victor in a war. I felt like a woman who had finally cleared the weeds from her garden so she could actually start living. Justice isn't a feeling, I told the cameras, it's a correction. And as for what's next, the world is much bigger than Haicheng. I stepped into my car and closed the door, the noise of the crowd fading into a muffled hum. The trial was over, the past was settled, now. There was only the future. The top floor of the series' international headquarters was a sanctuary of glass and steel, suspended high above the neon pulse of Haicheng. From this height, the city looked like a circuit board, complex, interconnected, and finally, under my control. The morning sun bled gold over the horizon, hitting the new logo etched into the building's facade. The name Shun had been scrubbed from the skyline, replaced by a symbol of a rising phoenix. A silent tribute to the fire that had forged me. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of crystal-clear water in my hand. I no longer wore the heavy, dark colors of revenge. Today, I was in a silk suit of soft, luminous white, the color of a fresh start, not a wedding. The final liquidation is complete. MS, Siren, Nina said, entering the room with a tablet. Her voice was no longer hushed with the tension of the hunt, it was bright with the energy of a new era. The Shun estate has been fully absorbed. The Northport project broke ground this morning under our new safety protocols. And, there's a letter for you. She placed a cream-colored envelope on my desk. It had no return address, only a prisoner identification number stamped in the corner. I didn't open it. I knew what it contained: more pleas for forgiveness, more justifications for a life built on sand. I picked up a lighter from the desk, ignited a small flame, and watched the corner of the envelope blacken and curl. I dropped it into a crystal ashtray, watching the last remnants of Shen Qingjuan's influence turn to grey ash. Is that the end of it? Nina asked softly. No, I replied, watching the ash drift. It's the beginning. A light knock came at the door. Zhu Xinian walked in, carrying 2 tickets and a file. He looked at the ashtray, then at me, a knowing smile playing on his lips. The board is asking for a statement on the merger, he said. Leaning against the mahogany desk, the world wants to know who the woman behind Ceres really is. They're calling you the Iron Queen of the East. Let them call me whatever they want, I said, turning back to the view. Names are just cages. I've spent enough time in cages. Well, Zhu Xinian stepped closer, handing me a ticket. Before you settle into your throne, there's a flight to Paris in 3 hours, a venture capital summit, followed by a month of silence on the Mediterranean. You've settled the debt of the past, Su Mion. It's time to invest in your own peace. I looked at the ticket. For the first time in 8 years, 5 years of service and 3 years of warfare, I had nothing to prove to anyone. I had avenged my father, reclaimed my legacy, and dismantled the monsters who thought I was a footnote in their story. Su Mion is a name for the history books, I said, taking the ticket, but I think I'll keep the name Siren. It reminds me that a voice can either be a song or a warning. It's up to the world to decide how they want to hear me. As we walked toward the private elevator, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a news alert. Headline: Shen Qingjuan enters maximum security. Lin Man denied parole. The end of an era. I didn't click on the article. I didn't need to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, micro recorder I had carried since that first night in the attic. I walked over to the balcony of the rooftop garden and held it over the edge. Goodbye, Qingjun, I whispered. I let go. The small black device fell through the air, tumbling down 100 stories until it was lost in the vast, churning machinery of the city below. The secrets it held were no longer my burden. The pain it recorded was no longer my identity. The elevator dinked, the doors sliding open to the helipad where a sleek chopper waited to take us to the airport. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the office, the seat of my power. It was beautiful, but it was just a building. My true empire was the freedom I felt in my chest. Are you ready? Zhu Xinian asked. Holding out a hand, I took it, not because I needed a guide, but because for the first time, I chose a partner who stood beside me, not over me. I've been ready for 3 years, I said. The helicopter lifted off, banking sharply toward the sea. As we climbed, Haicheng began to shrink, the mansions, the courts, the factories, all becoming tiny specks in a much larger world. I looked toward the horizon where the sun was now fully risen, burning away the last of the morning mist. I was no longer the girl who overheard a secret and cried. I was the woman who heard the truth and changed the world. The story of the placeholder bride was over. The legend of the woman who owned the sky had just begun.